They always say the corporate world rewards loyalty. 7 years ago, I believed that. I believed that if you worked hard, stayed late, smiled when you were supposed to, and helped others look good, the system would eventually repay you. I was wrong. My name is Evelyn Shaw, and for 7 years I worked at Hollister & Wren, a consulting firm that dressed mediocrity in glass walls and slogans about excellence. I was an operations analyst, the person who made sure everyone else's projects ran smoothly, quietly, perfectly. I was good at my job. Too good, maybe. The irony is that I used to teach new hires about compliance and company ethics. I told them how transparency was the foundation of trust. I used those words every quarter during training. I actually meant them. Last winter, everything changed. It was a Wednesday. The kind of gray, ordinary London morning that pretends it has no meaning. I had just wrapped up the quarterly performance review report, an analysis that had saved the company over £4 million in potential penalties during a client audit. My inbox was full of congratulations. My manager even wrote, "Couldn't have done this without you." At 10:00 a.m., HR sent me a meeting invite. No subject line, no details, just join Mr. Lang at 11:00 a.m. I thought maybe it was about a departmental restructure. I'd been lobbying for a new data analysis position. Maybe they were finally approving it. I walked into that white-walled HR office with my notebook in hand, completely unprepared for what waited on the other side of the table. Mr. Lang barely looked at me when I sat down. His laptop was open, fingers already hovering over the keyboard. He gave that polished corporate smile, polite but empty. "Evelyn," he said smoothly, "I'm afraid this will be difficult news." I blinked, unsure what he meant. He slid a paper across the table. One page, stapled once at the corner. "Your position," he continued, "is being made redundant effective immediately. You'll receive your statutory severance and accrued holiday pay." I didn't understand at first. I just led the audit that saved the company millions," I said quietly. He nodded, still typing. "Yes, and your work has been appreciated. This is simply a strategic restructuring decision." Strategic, that word, the same word I'd used in project reports. Now it was a knife. "This doesn't make sense," I managed. "You're cutting the position that identified and corrected the company's compliance gaps." Mr. Lang stopped typing. He folded his hands, leaned back slightly, and looked at me like a teacher humoring a slow student. "Evelyn," he said, voice soft but heavy with rehearsed finality, "we don't owe you anything." The air left the room. He said it like a fact, like gravity, like 7 years of work could be summarized as a legal null. I remember sitting there, staring at him, and realizing that the posters outside, the ones that said, "Our people are our greatest asset," were just corporate wallpaper. Nothing more. I wanted to fight, to argue, but his face was a mirror of indifference. The meeting was over before I found my voice. They had security escort me out. Standard protocol, they said. My colleagues pretended to be busy as I packed a box. Nobody wanted to make eye contact. Redundancy was contagious, and fear moves faster than compassion in offices like that. In the elevator, a young HR assistant stood beside me, clearly uncomfortable. He tried to say something kind. "Sorry about all this," he murmured. "It's just how things go sometimes." I looked at him and said, "No, it's how they make things go." That night I sat in my flat, surrounded by cardboard boxes, wondering how a life can shrink so quickly. My laptop, a stack of reports, one company mug, a framed team photo. 7 years compressed into silence. Anger didn't come right away. At first there was disbelief, then humiliation. I kept hearing his voice, "We don't owe you anything." It looped in my head until the words stopped sounding like English and started sounding like a dare. Out of habit more than hope, I opened my external drive and began sorting through old files. HR policies, training manuals, contracts, I had copies of everything. It was the compliance analyst in me. I saved every version, every revision. I told myself I'd delete them one day. Scrolling through them was like watching ghosts. But then something caught my eye, an old file from my first week at the company, Employment Agreement V23. I hadn't opened it in years. The current HR policies were all online now, but this one was the original, signed in ink, scanned for digital backup. As I skimmed through, I saw the standard boilerplate clauses: working hours, confidentiality, non-compete, intellectual property. Nothing unusual until I reached the lower pages. Each section had notes at the bottom, references to later amendments. I'd forgotten how detailed the firm's lawyers had been, and then I saw it. Clause 12, post-termination project compensation, special circumstances. The language was dense, old-fashioned, written before the firm modernized its HR templates. But one line stopped me cold. Any employee whose documented efforts directly contribute to a financial preservation or avoidance of penalty exceeding £100,000 shall, upon termination or redundancy, be entitled to contingent compensation amounting to 2.5% of the protected sum, provided the claim is submitted within 90 days. I stared at the screen, then I read it again, slowly. The compliance audit I led, my audit, had saved the company £4.2 million in potential fines. 2.5% of that was £105,000. I set the laptop down and laughed, a small, sharp laugh that sounded nothing like me. They told me they didn't owe me anything, and yet here it was, in black and white. They owed me 6 figures if I had the proof and the nerve to claim it. I opened a new document and titled it Clause 12, Activation Plan. For the first time in days, my hands stopped shaking. The tears dried on their own. The fear faded into something cleaner. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted precision. They had trained me to know the rules. They had armed me with every policy, every clause, every procedure. All I had to do now was use them, exactly the way they'd used them on me. When I closed my laptop that night, I already knew. I wasn't done with Hollister and Wren. Not yet. They thought they'd written me out of the system. What they didn't know was that I still had the keys. And contracts, unlike people, never forget. I used to think revenge was loud, shouting, smashing, confronting. But real revenge, the kind that works, is quiet. It hides in polite emails and calm voices. It sounds like compliance. The morning after discovering Clause 12, I went for a walk. It was freezing, breath turning white in the air. I walked past the building that had been my world for 7 years. Through the glass walls, I could see them, my team, typing, laughing. Sipping coffee like nothing had changed. My chair was already gone. They filled it with someone new. That should have hurt. It didn't. It only reminded me how replaceable we all are until the system finds a reason to remember us. And Clause 12 was about to make them remember me. I spent the next 3 days building a file, not a petty collection of screenshots or emails, a complete legal record. Every audit, every signature, every line of compliance documentation I'd ever written. I had the entire trail that proved my audit directly prevented that £4.2 million fine. I even had the internal memo with my initials on it. It was all there, buried inside the same bureaucracy that had erased me. But the hardest part wasn't the documentation. It was the silence. When you've been discarded, your instinct is to scream. I wanted to write angry emails to call people out by name. Instead, I waited. I listened. I watched. On the 4th day, I drafted a formal notice to HR. Just 3 paragraphs, clean and unemotional. Dear Mr. Lang, in accordance with Clause 12 of my employment contract, V23, I am submitting a formal claim for post-termination project compensation, following the compliance audit conducted in Q2, which resulted in the documented avoidance of £4.2 million in potential regulatory fines. I have attached supporting evidence and reference documentation. Regards, Evelyn Shaw. No threats, no emotion, just precision. I hit send at 9:17 a.m. By 9:21, the email had been read. By 9:26, forwarded. By 9:32, deleted. Deleted, except not really. I had receipt logs, a tracking tool from my compliance days that automatically recorded access metadata. Old habits. That evening, I got a response, not from Mr. Lang from HR Legal Operations. Dear Ms. Shaw, thank you for your correspondence. Clause 12, as referenced, is no longer active and was superseded by the updated Employment Framework Policy of 2019. Therefore, your claim is not applicable. Regards, HR Legal Ops. I read it 3 times, then smiled. They'd just made a mistake. Because if Clause 12 had been removed in 2019, they'd have needed written consent from all employees hired before that update, including me. And there was no record of me ever signing a revised contract. I checked twice, then again, had nothing. They thought I was another laid-off analyst who'd just disappear quietly. They didn't realize they'd train me to be the one person who knew how to find ghosts in the system. The next morning, I submitted a second letter, this time to the company's chief compliance officer, marked confidential legal escalation. Dear Mr. Care, as per compliance record ref 2023-07114, I led the regulatory audit resulting in documented savings of £4.2 million. Under Clause 12 of my original signed employment agreement, I am legally entitled to contingent compensation. Please note that the HR department has referenced a 2019 framework policy to deny this claim. However, under UK contract law, retroactive amendments without employee acknowledgement are void. This email serves as formal notice prior to third-party review. Kind regards, Evelyn Shaw. This time, I didn't get a reply, not right away. But 2 days later, I noticed something strange. My old employee credentials, the ones that should have been deactivated, were suddenly reactivated for 12 hours. I didn't ask for access. It had done it automatically, by request from HR. They were digging. They were trying to see how much I knew. So I let them. For 12 hours, they rummaged through the remnants of my work archive, not realizing that I was watching every move. The metadata tracker I'd set up years ago was still active. Every folder they opened, every document they tried to modify, it all left a footprint. By midnight, I had a full report. They'd accessed 6 documents, the same ones proving my authorship of the audit. They even edited timestamps. It was clumsy, desperate, and it gave me exactly what I needed, proof of tampering. At that point, it stopped being about the £105,000. It became something cleaner, sharper, the principle. They didn't just try to erase me, they tried to rewrite history. I waited 1 more week before sending my third and final email. This one wasn't addressed to HR. It went to every member of the executive board, with "For transparency review" in the subject line. Good afternoon, attached. Please find documentation regarding Clause 12 compensation eligibility, including metadata logs indicating retroactive alterations to compliance archives by HR personnel after my termination. This email is not a threat. It's a record. The system should protect the company, not bury the truth to save face. Respectfully, Evelyn Shaw. I didn't sleep that night. My phone kept lighting up with unknown numbers. I didn't answer a single one. By morning, I received a single reply from an executive address I didn't recognize. Ms. Shaw, please confirm a time this week for a confidential discussion regarding your previous correspondence. Regards, G. Wyndham, Managing Director. That's when I knew it had worked. They could ignore an employee. They could intimidate a complaint, but they couldn't risk a paper trail that proved HR had altered evidence. It wasn't about power anymore. It was about containment. And suddenly, they needed me quiet. That's how revenge starts. Not with a scream, but with silence so absolute it makes people nervous. What they didn't know was that silence had become my weapon. I used to think that justice came from courage, from speaking up, standing tall, demanding truth. But inside a corporation, justice doesn't shout. It whispers in documents. It hides in the metadata, and it waits. The message from the managing director, G. Wyndham, was short, polite, and careful. Confidential discussion. That phrase always means damage control. I didn't respond right away. I wanted them to sweat. For 2 days, I let their emails pile up, HR, legal, even my old manager. Each message more urgent than the last. When I finally replied, it was a single line. Thursday, 9 a.m., video call preferred. That morning, I made coffee, straightened my hair, and sat at my kitchen table like it was a war room. I didn't need to dress up. I wanted them to see the calm in my face, the control. The call started exactly at 9. The corporate logo flashed on screen, followed by 3 faces: Mr. Wyndham, Mr. Lang, and a woman from legal whose name I didn't catch. They all smiled too much. "Evelyn," Wyndham began, "thank you for taking the time. We've reviewed your correspondence. We want to find an amicable resolution." Amicable. Another corporate word that means we're scared but pretending not to be. I smiled back. Of course, I'm always open to resolution. Lang looked smaller on screen than I remembered. His tone, still smooth, had cracks in it. "Clause 12, he began, was part of an outdated framework. It's not valid under the 2019 policy update." I leaned slightly forward. Then, why didn't anyone notify employees? And why does my signature not appear on any amendment acknowledging that change? Silence, the kind that thickens the air. I continued before they could recover. "And while we're on the topic, Mr. Lang, would you like to explain why HR personnel accessed my archived compliance files after my termination? The system logs show timestamps at 22:41 and 22:48 on the 14th. That's unauthorized tampering." Lang froze. The legal woman adjusted her glasses, typing furiously. Wyndham cleared his throat. "Evelyn, that may have been a routine administrative error." "No, it wasn't," I interrupted. "Routine doesn't alter timestamps. Routine doesn't delete author metadata." The silence that followed was perfect, clean, controlled. They knew I had them. The firm's entire brand rested on integrity and trust. If a compliance breach, internal tampering, ever reached clients, the fallout would be catastrophic. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The fear was already visible in the shift of their posture, the way their eyes darted to one another, searching for a script that didn't exist. Finally, Wyndham spoke. "Evelyn, we'd like to handle this internally. Would you be open to an immediate settlement?" There it was, the offer, the bribe dressed as closure. I kept my tone steady. "I'm open to what's fair. My contract entitles me to 2.5% of £4.2 million, £105,000. I'll accept that in full and final settlement with written acknowledgement that Clause 12 remains valid for all employees hired prior to 2019. The lawyer frowned. "That's not standard." "It's ethical," I said simply, "and it's the only offer I'll consider." Wyndham hesitated. "You're asking us to admit liability." I smiled faintly. "I'm asking you to honor a contract." The meeting ended without agreement, but I could feel it, the shift, the panic. They weren't trying to refute me anymore. They were trying to contain me. That's when I set the trap. The next day I sent one more email, but not to them. To myself, an automated message, time-stamped and stored in a public blockchain archive. It contained every document, every piece of correspondence, and one paragraph summarizing the call, phrased neutrally, legally airtight. Then I shared that archive with a private link, not to the press, not to a lawyer, not yet, to the company's Audit and Risk Committee, a group entirely separate from HR and management. By Monday, the system had begun to eat itself. The Audit Committee opened an internal inquiry into potential procedural irregularities. It flagged the unauthorized access logs. The legal department went silent. HR went into lockdown. And suddenly, all 3 people from that video call disappeared from the company directory. Wyndham was on leave. Lang's email auto-replied, "No longer with the company." The legal advisor's LinkedIn changed to seeking new opportunities. They tried to bury Clause 12 and got buried by it. A week later, an envelope arrived at my flat. No logo, just my name typed neatly across the front. Inside, a letter and a check. Dear Ms. Shaw, following a review of your employment agreement, the company has confirmed your eligibility under Clause 12. Please find enclosed the appropriate compensation in full and final settlement. We thank you for your contributions to Hollister and Wren. Executive Office. The check was for £105,000, no apology, no admission, just money and silence. I stared at it for a long time. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't, not immediately. Because revenge doesn't erase what they took. It only balances the scales. Still, there was a strange satisfaction in knowing that the system had turned on itself. That the same machine which had erased me now had to pay me to make me disappear. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it away in a drawer. I didn't cash the check right away. I just sat there, in the quiet, thinking about what they'd done and what I'd done back. The trap had worked, but part of me knew it wasn't over yet, not really. Because when you expose rot inside a system that big, it doesn't vanish. It spreads. And some part of me, the same part that once believed in fairness, needed to know just how deep it went. That's where the real story began. I didn't plan to go back, but 6 months later I found myself standing across the street from the building, glass and steel gleaming under a gray London sky. Hollister and Wren, my old life, reflected back at me in perfect symmetry, efficient, emotionless, and immaculate. They changed the logo. It looked the same, just softer around the edges, rebranded to suggest renewal and human integrity. The irony was almost poetic. I wasn't there for closure. I was there because someone inside had sent me a message. No greeting, no name, just one line. You were right, it went deeper. Attached was a file, encrypted, password-protected, same internal structure I once managed. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did inside. Payroll anomalies, contractor fraud, bonus misallocations. Things buried years before my termination. They'd used the same loopholes to silence others. That was the moment I understood something I hadn't wanted to face. The enemy was Lang. It was Windham. It was the system itself. A machine designed to protect itself, even when no one was left to defend it. I remember closing the laptop and just sitting there. The quiet in my flat felt heavier than any meeting room I'd ever been in. Because when you spend months dismantling a structure like that, part of it gets inside you, the logic, the coldness, the efficiency. And once you've learned how it thinks, it never really leaves. I didn't leak the file, not out of fear, out of exhaustion. For the first time in years, I didn't want to fight another faceless department, another polished voice on a call reading from a script. Instead, I did something smaller. I wrote a report not about my case, but about their system. I stripped the names, the numbers, the brands, just patterns of behavior, how institutions rationalize cruelty, how bureaucracy launders blame. It was published in an ethics journal 3 months later, quietly, without my name. It didn't trend, it didn't expose anyone, but people read it, the right people. Whistleblowers, compliance officers, junior analysts who recognized themselves in every line. And one by one, they started sending their own reports. I became the thing the company feared most, not a lawsuit, but a voice that wouldn't go away. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the hum of that office in my mind. The low buzz of ambition, the polite deceit, the quiet terror of being disposable. It doesn't haunt me anymore. It just reminds me who I used to be and what it cost to stop being her. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it's quieter. It's a system learning, painfully, to see its own reflection. And maybe that's all I ever wanted, not to win, but to be seen.